The fire in the common room of the Crow and Thistle had burned low by the time the carriage arrived. Mira Voss heard the wheels before she saw the lantern. She was on her knees beside the hearth, coaxing the last of the evening's coals with a folded bellows, her apron damp from the supper clearing, and her hair coming loose at the back of her neck, where she had pinned it too hastily that morning. The sound of iron-rimmed wheels on the frozen lane outside was not unusual for the first week of December, when travelers pressed hard through the Vale of Ashmore to reach the posting road before the worst of the weather. What was unusual was that the carriage stopped. It did not slow with the tentative roll of a driver uncertain of his destination. It stopped. Decisively. Fully, as though the man holding the reins had meant to stop here and nowhere else. Mira stood. She set the bellows on the stone and smoothed her apron and moved to the window, and she looked out through the wavy pane at the yard. The carriage was dark lacquered. The horses matched grays, and the single footman who descended from the box moved with the practiced quiet of a household accustomed to arriving unannounced. There was no crest on the door. She noticed that particularly. She had lived at the Crow and Thistle for nearly 2 years, and she had learned that the absence of a crest could mean one of two things: a gentleman traveling in deliberate obscurity, or a gentleman who had lost the right to display one. She did not have long to wonder. The inn door opened, and cold air entered the room before the man did, and then the man entered, and the cold somehow remained, though the fire had not gone out. He was tall, with a coat of charcoal gray wool that bore the dust of a long road on its shoulders, and the cut of an expert tailor in its seams. His cravat was still neat. His boots were good. His hair was dark and slightly disordered at the crown, as though he had removed his hat and not quite thought to smooth it back, and his face, when it turned toward the room, was the kind that did not invite quick reading. Not cold, precisely. Still, as though all the energy in it had been directed inward for some considerable time, and had left the surface composed but unoccupied. He did not look at her immediately. He looked at the fire, and at the empty tables, and at the low beam over the door he had just come through. He looked at the room the way a man looks at a place he thought he would never see again. "This is Ashmore," he said. It was not a question. "It is," Mira said. "The village of Ashmore, in the Vale, belonging to the parish of St. Crispin's Cross." "Yes." She folded her hands in her apron. "You have arrived, sir." He said nothing for a moment. His jaw tightened and released. Then he said, "I will need a room, and supper, if there is any left, and a private word with the proprietor, if you can arrange it." The proprietor of the Crow and Thistle was Mr. Bobber Harwick, a widower of 60 years, who kept his ledgers in a shaking hand and his opinions of guests largely to himself. He was already descending the staircase, drawn by the sound of voices and the particular instinct innkeepers develop for travelers who will require effort. Mira stepped aside. She went to the kitchen. She did not listen at the door because she had not yet learned that there was anything particular to hear. What she heard anyway through the plank wall between the kitchen passage and the private parlor where Mr. Sasting Harwick took his important guests was a single sentence, spoken in a voice too low for the words to be entirely clear, and then Mr. Harwick's answer, which was perfectly audible because Mr. Harwick was a man whose whisper had never quite managed the required discretion. "Well," said Mr. Harwick, "I should not be the one to tell you, but since you are asking, Miss Voss has worked here these 22 months. She is a good girl, quiet, keeps herself to herself." Mira stood very still, with a cold plate in each hand. "Miss Voss," the man said. "Voss." "Wah." And something in the way he said, it made the name sound like a word he had been searching for in a language he had almost forgotten. She did not sleep easily that night. It would be useful, in accounting for what followed, to say something of how Mira Voss had come to be at the Crow and Thistle at all, and why a woman of her education and manner found herself coaxing coals in a country inn at the edge of winter. Her father had been a physician, a good one, in the opinion of those who could not afford the fashionable sort, which was to say most of Ashmore and the surrounding farms for 15 miles in every direction. Dr. Voss had kept a small practice on the lane behind the church, and a smaller house beside it, and Mira had grown up among his journals and his instruments, and his steady conviction that a person's worth was most legible in what they chose to do, when no one was watching. He had died in the spring of the previous year, quickly as physicians sometimes do, of the very kind of fever they have spent their lives treating in others. He left Mira, the house, the journals, and £12. The house had not quite been his to leave as it emerged when the solicitor arrived from Whitbourne. It had been held under a lease renewable, at the discretion of the estate, and the estate in question, Caldermere, had changed hands not 6 months prior, when the old Marquess of Calday died, and his heir, a man no one in Ashmore had seen in 11 years, became the new Lord of the Vale. The new Marquess's man of business had been correct and impersonal. The lease would not be renewed. The house was required. Miss Voss was given until the end of the month. Mira had gone to Mr. Gacty Harwick because she had nowhere else to go, and Mr. Harwick, who had known her father, had given her a room above the stables and a wage of 9 shillings a week. She was not ungrateful. She told herself she was not ungrateful, and she told herself this often enough that it almost ceased to require telling. To the village of Ashmore she was simply Dr. Voss's daughter, who had come down in the world. That was the phrase. Mrs. Tibbet at the dry goods shop had used it first, in a voice pitched exactly at the register that carries across a room while appearing to be directed at only one person, the girl who had come down in the world, as though she had done something wrong by being dispossessed, as though grief and poverty were a species of poor judgment. She had learned to move through the common room without meeting eyes. She had learned to carry the phrase the way one carries a stone, in one's shoe, acknowledging the pressure without allowing it to alter the step. The stranger was at the inn for 3 days before she learned his name. The first morning he requested a plate of cold beef, and the loan of any maps she might find that pertained to the Calday estate and its boundaries. She brought him the maps without comment, though she noted, with the particular attention she had learned to give to anything that touched the subject of Caldermere, that his hands when he unrolled them were not the hands of a man accustomed to reading maps. They were the hands of a man who had once known the land in question well enough that maps had been unnecessary. He did not thank her for the maps. He set one hand flat on the table over the rendering of the northern pastures, and his face, bent over it, showed something she could not quite name, the kind of expression that has been folded away for so long that its owner no longer notices it has not gone. On the second morning he was in the yard at first light. He had saddled his horse himself rather than wait for the ostler, and she watched from the kitchen window as he mounted and turned the grey gelding, not toward the posting road, but toward the lane that led up through the beech wood to the high field that bordered Caldermere's oldest wool. He did not come back until midday. He ate in silence. He returned the maps. It was on the afternoon of the second day that she overheard Mrs. Tibbet speaking to Mr. Plyme. Harwick, in the low, satisfied tone of one who has recently come into information. He's the Marquess himself, Mrs. Tibbet said. Come back, after all this time. My sister's girl works at the Caldermere kitchen, and she says the housekeeper there very nearly fainted when word came down from his man that he intended to spend Christmas at the house. Christmas after 11 years gone. Is that so? Said Mr. Harwick, who had clearly known this already, and was performing ignorance with his usual incomplete success. People are saying, Mrs. Pray. Tibbet continued, lowering her voice by precisely the amount required to ensure she could still be heard, that he ought not to have come back, that there is nothing here for him and he knows it. That a man who abandons his estate in grief is not a man who deserves to find it waiting. People, said Mr. Harwick mildly, are not his estate's steward. No, said Mrs. Tibbet, but people have memories. Mira set down the pitcher she was carrying. She set it down carefully because her hands had begun to do something she could not afford, something that would be visible to anyone who happened to look at them, so she pressed them flat against the cooling stone of the passage wall, until the sensation passed. The man in the grey coat was the Marquess of Calday. The man who had taken her house was in the next room eating cold beef and reading her father's county and maps. She went back to her work. There was no alternative to going back to her work. She had not expected him to seek her out. Raxand. She had not expected anything from him, which was not the same as hoping for nothing, though she had worked very hard for the past year and a half to ensure that the distinction did not present itself clearly to her mind at 3 o'clock in the morning. He found her in the small back room where she mended the inn's linen by lamplight on winter afternoons, when the common room was quiet and Mr. Harwick was dozing in the kitchen chair. She did not hear him come to the door because she had been thinking, and she did not look up until his shadow crossed the lamp. "Miss Voss," he said. She put down the linen. She stood because it would have been insolent to remain seated, and she looked at him, which cost her rather more than standing. Up close he was older than she had first thought, 37 or 38, with a fine line at the corner of each eye, and a quality in his expression that she recognized from her father's face in the last months of his life. It was not illness. It was the look of a person who has been carrying something at a very particular angle for a very long time, and has become so practiced at carrying it that they have nearly forgotten it is there. "I am told," he said, "that the house on the church lane was yours." "My father's," she said, "and that my predecessor's man of business gave you 30 days to vacate." 28, she said. He was precise. His jaw tightened. "I did not know," he said. "I was not here. I had given standing instructions regarding the estate's leases, but those instructions were composed 11 years ago and did not anticipate every circumstance." "No," she said. "I imagine they did not." The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was not unkind. He looked at her steadily, and she looked back at him steadily. "And she thought he was telling me this, because he wants me to know he did not intend it. That is something, and not nothing. I should like to make it right," he said. "If you will permit me to know what that would require." She had not expected that sentence. She had prepared herself, very carefully, for a great many things over the past year and a half, and she found now that this was not among them. The heat that came into her face was an inconvenience she could not entirely prevent, and she was grateful for the lamplight's merciful distortion. "There is nothing to make right, my lord," she said. "The law was followed. I have a position." "You have a position," he said, and something in his voice when he repeated it suggested that he found the description inadequate. "A good one," she said. "Is it?" "I did not ask you to come and assess it," she said, and then stopped, because that was not the appropriate register for a conversation with a Marquess, and she had been careful for so long that the lapse startled her more than it appeared to startle him. His expression did not change, or rather it changed in a way that was very small and would have been invisible to anyone not paying close attention, something at the corner of his mouth. "No," he said. "You did not." He left. She sat back down with the linen and did not pick it up for a considerable time. If you have ever waited for something you were afraid to want, you will understand what Mira did with the days that followed. She worked. She carried trays and mended linen and coaxed fires and kept her eyes from the door of the common room in the particular way that looking away from something requires more effort than looking at it. The Marquess of Calais remained at the Crow and Thistle. She did not know why. She did not ask. He was at the inn each evening for supper, and at his table each morning for bread and coffee, and she served him with the same care she served every guest, which was to say, methodically, without ceremony, and without the particular excess of attention that would have announced itself. She noticed, in the way she could not help noticing, that he watched her. Not brazenly, not in the manner of a man of rank who has decided the rules of observation do not apply to him. He watched her the way a man watches something he does not yet have a word for. On the 4th evening, Mr. Price arrived. Mr. Bragg. Price was a solicitor from Whitbourne, and Mira knew his face because it was the face that had handed her father's house away. He came in from the cold, with the particular manner of men who dislike their own errands and compensate with an excess of authority. He did not look at her when she took his coat. He looked around the room until he found the Marquess. "My lord," he said, "I have ridden from Whitbourne to speak with you. The matter of the eastern cottages is not resolved, and the tenants have written a petition that I believe requires your personal attention before the quarter day." The Marquess set down his coffee. "Sit down, Price," he said. "My lord, the petition also touches on the matter of the Voss property, specifically the question of the secondary lease that your predecessor extended to the late Dr. Voss, and which I advised should not be extended further, given the estate's current requirements for the adjoining field." She was in the act of carrying a tray to the far table. She did not stop. She carried the tray to the far table, and she set the plates down with steady hands. And she heard Mr. Price say, "I understand the girl took a position here which is really the most sensible outcome given the circumstances." And she carried the tray back to the kitchen and stood in the kitchen passage for long enough to be certain her face had settled. The Marquess said nothing in response to Mr. Price's assessment. Not immediately. She heard the sound of the coffee cup being placed down on the wood of the table, precise and final. And then she heard the Marquess say, in the level voice he used when he meant to be heard without raising his volume, "The girl's name is Miss Voss Price. Use it." She could not see Mr. Price's face. She was in the kitchen passage. She suspected it had shifted. On the 5th day, the weather broke. December sent down the first hard snow of the season in the early afternoon, and by evening, the lane outside the Crow and Thistle was a pale and quiet road that seemed to have nothing to do with commerce or haste. Mira was banking the fire in the common room when the Marquess came downstairs and stood near the window looking out at it. And she banked the fire and did not say anything, and he said nothing either for a long time. And then he said, "There is a beech tree on the far edge of the north field. Do you know the one?" "Yes," she said without turning from the fire. "My father used to take his afternoon walk past it. He said the roots had pushed through the wall at some point, and the estate's stonemason and the tree had been conducting a negotiation for 30 years. A silence. She heard him shift toward the window again. "He was right," he said. "The roots won the last section in the spring of 1804. I remember it particularly because my mother had come to walk with me that morning and she laughed for a very long time at the crack in the capstones." Mira said nothing. She did not trust herself to say something adequate. "She died that winter," he said. "My mother. And then my father. The following spring. I came into the title at 26, which is not an age a man is prepared for it, and I managed very badly for approximately 5 years, and then I found I could not manage at all, and I left." "The village knows you left," she said carefully. "The village," he said, "is correct. I left. I had no business leaving in the manner I did, and I have thought about that for 11 years. And I am not certain 11 years is sufficient to account for it, but it is what I have." She turned then because the quality of what he had said required that she look at him when she replied. He was looking at the snow. His reflection in the wavy glass of the window was ghostly and imprecise, as though he existed slightly outside the ordinary frame of things. "My father used to say," she said, "that grief was not an argument, that a person could grieve and still be responsible for what they did in it." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father sounds like a difficult man to have had as a father." "He was an honest one," she said. "Which is not always comfortable, but it is not nothing." He looked at her then, and she held the look because she was her father's daughter. And she had learned that there were moments when looking away was a species of dishonesty, and this felt like one of those moments. "No," he said. "Ah, it is not nothing." She went to bed that night with the particular ache of a person who has begun to want something they have not given themselves permission to want. It was Mr. Price who forced the matter. He had stayed at the Crow and Thistle rather than ride back to Whitbourne in the snow. And he joined the common room for breakfast on the 6th morning, in the mood of a man who has been thinking in his room all night, and arrived at conclusions he finds professionally satisfying. He sat down across from the Marquess before the coffee had been poured, and opened a leather case on the table with the air of a man unveiling a solution. "My lord," he said, "I have prepared the appropriate letters regarding the Voss lease. The technical question is straightforward. The estate did not renew, the occupant vacated. The matter is closed. I propose we document it as such, and attend to the eastern cottages, which are the more pressing concern." The Marquess looked at him, not unkindly, with the attention of a man who is about to say something very specific. "The matter," he said, "is not closed. My Lord Miss Voss's father held the lease for 31 years. He raised a daughter there. He died there." He paused. "The lease was ended because someone with authority over the estate gave standing instructions without considering who would be affected by them. Those instructions were sound estate management," Mr. Price said, with the slight edge of a professional man whose judgment has been questioned in a public room. "They were," the Marquess said, "and they were also insufficient." Sext asked. "Both things can be true." Mira was at the far end of the room pouring coffee for the only other guest, a wool merchant from Tiverton, who was watching this exchange with the absorbed attention of a man who had paid for entertainment and received it unexpectedly. She did not look at Mr. Price. She looked at the coffee she was pouring, and kept it very steady. "I intend," the Marquess said, "to offer Miss Voss the tenancy of the North Cottage, the one that has been empty since the Hargrove family removed to Brethwick. It is a better property than the Church Lane house. It has 4 rooms and its own kitchen garden, and it is not adjacent to the lane, which means it is quieter. The lease will be renewable in perpetuity, at the original rent her father paid, which I understand was £4 annually." Mr. Price was silent for a moment. "That is below the market rate for the property, my lord." "Yes," said the Marquess, "it is, and if Miss Voss declines, then I will have made the offer," he said, "which is what is owed." She had stopped pouring. She did not recall stopping. The wool merchant cleared his throat gently, and she poured the remaining half-cup and moved away. And she stood at the kitchen door with the empty coffee pot in her hand, and the cold of the passage behind her, and a warmth in her chest that she did not yet have a name for. She had not been asked yet. He had spoken of what he intended, not of what she wished. There was a distinction there, and it was the kind of distinction her father had taught her to hold carefully, because the difference between being told what will happen to you and being asked what you would choose was not a small one. She went to find him that afternoon, when Mr. Price had gone to the parlor with his leather case and his affronted ledgers, and when the common room was empty and the snow outside was still and the fire was doing the particular thing winter fires do in stone-walled rooms, which is to make the world outside seem very far away. "My lord," she said. He turned from the window. He had been at the window again. She thought he perhaps spent a great deal of time at windows, the way men do who have been places from which they cannot easily return. "Miss Voss." "I wish to say," she said, "that I heard what you said to Mr. Price this morning." He waited. "I also wished to say," she continued, "that I have not yet decided whether to accept your offer, and I would be grateful if you would allow me to consider it, rather than considering it decided." Something crossed his face. She thought it might have been relief. "Of course," he said. "I am not ungrateful," she said. "I want that to be clear. I am not treating the offer as though it were nothing, because it is not nothing, and I know what it would mean in practical terms, and I know that you did not have to make it." "I did," he said. "Have to make it." "I know you believe that," she said. "I am saying something different. I am saying that I want to choose what I do next, and I would like that choice to be mine." He was very still. Outside the snow had stopped, and the light through the window was that particular flat pewter light that comes after snowfall, when the world has gone very quiet, and every sound is somehow further away than it should be. "It should always have been yours," he said. The warmth in her chest moved up into her throat, and she put a hand against the back of the chair nearest her, not because she needed it, but because the contact was useful. "Tell me," she said, "about the North Cottage," he told her. He described it in the particular way of a man who has been walking the land in his memory for 11 years. Who knows which stones are loose in the garden wall, and which window faces east, and catches the first of the morning, and which old apple tree in the kitchen garden still produces in autumn. He spoke about it the way her father had spoken about patients he was fond of, with a specificity that was a kind of care. She listened. She asked questions. She asked practical questions about the condition of the roof and the distance to the well. and he answered them without impatience. And she thought he had thought about this. This was not an impulse. He had thought about this property, and about her father, and about the chain of events that produced the thing that cannot be undone. And he has tried to locate what is within his power. She did not fall in love with the North Cottage. She had not yet seen it. What she felt standing by the fire in the common room of the Crow and Thistle, on the 6th day of December with the snow outside and the coffee pot returned to the kitchen, was something that did not have a tidy name in the language of the season or the marriage market. It was closer to being seen, the specific, rare, slightly terrifying sensation of being seen. She was aware of it in the way one is, aware of the precise moment when the fire that has been struggling catches. She did not say so. She said, "I will think about the cottage, my lord. I would like to ride out and see it when the lane is passable tomorrow," he said. "If the lane is passable, I will arrange the horses." "Yes," she said, "tomorrow." She went back to the kitchen. Mr. Harwick looked up from his chair with the alert expression of a man who has not quite been asleep. "All well?" he said. "Quite well," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the particular look of a man who has known someone long enough to know when they are lying by omission. He did not press it. The Marquess of Calde had been at the inn for 6 nights. Mrs. Tibbet had passed through the common room twice, in that time on errands she had clearly manufactured, and on the second occasion she had said to Mr. Schatt, Harwick, in the voice that was not quite a whisper, that she supposed some people had a talent for making the best of situations they had created themselves, meaning the Marquess, and that others had rather less dignity in managing their reduced circumstances than one might hope, meaning Mira, and that the whole affair was a curiosity. Mira had heard it from the passage. She carried it the way she carried everything Mrs. Tibbet said, which was briefly and without putting it down anywhere she would have to pick it up again. On the 7th morning, the lane was passable. He was in the yard when she came down, and he had brought a second horse. A steady dark bay that would not alarm a woman who, as he had correctly inferred, had not ridden in some time. He did not comment on this. He simply held the bay still while she mounted, and when she had settled herself, he released the bridle, and they rode out from the yard into the thin, bright cold of a December morning after snow. The lane to the North Cottage ran through the beech wood first, and then out along the field wall that bounded Caldermere's oldest property, and she recognized the wall because her father had walked along it every afternoon. He was well enough to walk, and she had walked beside him. And the familiarity of the gray stone against the white of the new snow was the kind of thing that put pressure on the inside of the chest without warning. She did not cry. She was not a woman who cried easily, which was not, as she had been careful to distinguish in her own mind, the same as being a woman who did not feel. He did not speak for most of the ride, and she was grateful. He had the gift that some men have, which is not a small or common gift, of comprehending when silence is a form of company. The North Cottage stood at the edge of the beech wood, set back from the field wall by a short path of pale stone, with its east window exactly where he had said it was, and its kitchen garden, behind a low fence that would need repair before the spring. She did not say anything when she first saw it. She sat on the bay and looked at it for a moment, and the morning light was very clear, and the snow on the roof was undisturbed. "The roof held last winter without any notable trouble," he said, quietly, from a few feet to her right. "The chimney is stone," she said. "That will last." "Yes." She got down from the horse. She walked up the path and put her hand on the door, which was unlocked, and pushed it open, and went inside. He waited in the yard. He did not follow her in. She understood, without being told that this was deliberate, that he was giving her the particular space a person needs when they are deciding whether a thing can be a home. She stood in the small front room and looked at the east window, which faced exactly as he had said, and at the fireplace, which was clean and cold, and at the low ceiling that would require a man of his height to mind his head at the beams. She looked at the shelf on the far wall where someone had left a single volume, A Natural History of the English Countryside, its spine faded to a gray that had once been green. She picked it up. She turned to the frontispiece. There was a name there, written in ink, that had gone brown with time. A name in a hand she had never seen. The name was Edmund Calday. She stood for a moment with the book in her hands, and the light coming through the east window and the cold of the empty hearth at her back, and she thought about what it meant that this cottage had been his, and that he had left this book here, and that the first object her hands had found in this room was a thing that had been his before she was old enough to remember the walk along the wall. She went back out. He was holding both horses, watching the kitchen garden fence with the assessing look of a man calculating the work required to put it right. He looked up when she came out. "There is a book on the shelf," she said. "A natural history." "I believe it was yours." He was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, so briefly that she might have missed it except that she had been paying close attention to this man for 7 days, and she had learned where to look. "It was," he said. "My father's. Originally he used to bring it. When he walked out here. He said the keeper's cottage had the best morning light for reading." "It does," she said. He looked at her then. The question in his eyes was not the kind that requires words, and she met it with the steadiness she had inherited from a man who had believed that honesty was its own kind of answer. "I should like to take the tenancy," she said. "If the offer stands, it stands," he said. They rode back in the same comfortable quiet, and she thought, this is not the end of something, and it is not the beginning of a story she could have predicted. But it is something particular to these two people, and this lane and this valley in December. She had not expected to be asked what she wanted. She had not, if she was truthful with herself, expected to be seen. In the weeks that followed, the Marquess of Calday did what he had come to Ashmore to do, which was to attend to his estate with a systematic care that suggested 11 years of guilt applied as industry. He was at Caldermere each day. He rode the boundaries, he met with his tenants, he sat with the steward over the ledgers until late into the evenings. He was not, during this time, at the Crow and Thistle, and Mira did not see him except on the occasions when his business brought him through the village and he passed the inn-yard. He always paused when he passed. She always noticed. It was the housekeeper at Caldermere, a Mrs. Flood, who came to see her at the Crow and Thistle on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of December, carrying a small package wrapped in cloth and tied with plain string. "His lordship asked me to bring this," Mrs. Flood said. She was a comfortable woman of 50 years, with the settled manner of someone who has survived several different marquesses and is not easily astonished. "He said you would know what it was." She opened the package in her room above the stables. It was the natural history. The one with his father's name in the frontispiece. There was a note with it, in a hand she had not seen before. The note said in full that the book belonged in the cottage, with the better light. He thought perhaps it should arrive before she did. She held the book for a long time. She looked at the brown ink of the old name, and then she turned to the first page, which was an illustration of an English beech tree in full autumn leaf, its roots described in a small inset drawing, with the patient detail of someone who had wanted to understand how the thing held to the ground. She thought he had given her his father's book. She thought he had been thinking about this cottage, and this tenancy, and her, in the weeks he was not here. She thought she was going to need to have a conversation with this man that could not take place across a common room. She wrote him a note. It was brief, and said only that she had received the book, that she was grateful for it, and that if it was convenient she would call at Caldermere on Thursday morning. He wrote back the same afternoon. The note said that Thursday morning would be most convenient, and that he would see the east drawing-room was aired. She arrived at Caldermere on Thursday morning in her best dress, which was a warm gray wool with a cream Spencer jacket that had been her mother's and still fit, somewhat surprisingly, across the shoulders. She had put her hair up carefully. She had worn her good gloves. These were not performances for his benefit so much as they were a declaration to herself that she was arriving at this house not as a suppliant or a problem to be managed, but as herself. Mrs. Flood showed her in. The east drawing-room had tall windows and a fire that had been built up to a proper warmth, and 2 chairs set at an angle to it that suggested someone had thought about the placement. The Marquess was standing by the window, as he had stood at every window she had seen him near, and he turned when she entered. And he said, "Miss Voss." "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the book," she said. It wanted better company than an empty shelf. She sat in one of the chairs by the fire. He sat in the other. They had never, she realized, sat down together in the same room. Mrs. Flood brought tea. She left. "I want to tell you something," Mira said, "and I want to say it plainly, because I have found that the plainness of a thing is not its flaw." He looked at her. "I do not intend to take the North Cottage as a form of gratitude," she said. "I intend to take it because it is a good cottage, and the rent is fair, and it will allow me to live independently. I want you to understand that distinction." "I do understand it," he said. "I also want you to know," she continued, and here the plainness was harder, though she did not look away, "that I have thought a great deal about the past 7 days. And I think you are a person who has spent 11 years being very sorry. And I think being very sorry is not nothing, but I also think it is not sufficient to account for the rest of a life." He was very still. "I think," she said, "that what you need to do now is be present, not apologetic, not managed, present, in the valley, at the estate, at the things you left." "I know it," he said, quietly. "I know you know it," she said. "I am saying it anyway, because someone should." He looked at the fire for a moment. When he looked back at her, something in his face had shifted that she could not precisely name. Some quality of sustained endurance replaced by something more immediate, more present, exactly as she had said. "Edmund," he said. She looked at him. "My name," he said, "Edmund." "The way you say, my lord, there is always a half-beat of hesitation before it, as though you are translating. I thought you might prefer the other thing." The warmth in her chest was something she had been managing for 8 days, and she was no longer entirely certain she wished to manage it. "Mira," she said, "if we are doing this—" "We are," he said. The tea grew cold. Neither of them noticed for quite some time. She moved into the North Cottage in the first week of January. The lane was clear enough by then, and Mr. Harwick helped her with the 2 trunks she owned, and she set the natural history on the shelf by the east window where it had been before, because it seemed right that the book and the room should be reconciled to each other. Edmund Caldy rode out the first week, and the second week, and the third, and each time he arrived in the morning with his horse tied at the garden gate, she opened the door before he knocked, because she had learned the particular sound of his horse on the frozen lane. He always brought something. A basket from Caldermere's kitchen, a cutting from the greenhouse for the window box, once a folded map of the property that he had drawn from memory in the evenings, the boundaries exact, the old beech tree marked with a small symbol at the corner of the north field. She hung the map above the fireplace. He did not ask her to marry him in the way of men who have decided the matter in advance, and are notifying a party rather than consulting one. He asked her on a gray morning, in February when the kitchen garden was still frozen, and they were standing at the fence deciding what would need to be done to the posts before the spring thaw, in a voice that had nothing performed about it. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to know that whatever you answer, the tenancy stands and the book stays, and I will not use any of it as a lever." She looked at him. The cold had put color into his face, and his expression was the most unguarded she had yet seen it. "I find," he said, "that I would like very much to know you for the rest of my life. Not at the North Cottage, or at Caldermere, or at a particular distance. I would like to know you without a lane between us. I would like you to tell me when I am managing badly, and I would like to be the person you do not have to choose your words around, and I would like, if you are willing, to be present in the way you said a person should be. With you." She looked at the frozen garden for a moment. "That is a great deal to like," she said. "It is," he said. "It would require," she said, "that you continue to be honest about what you manage badly. I do not do well with pretense." "I know," he said. "I have noticed that about you. And it would require," she said, "that you understand I will have opinions about the beech tree and the north field And the wall, because I have been thinking about that wall since I was 9 years old. I would welcome your opinions on the wall, he said. I have been losing the argument with the roots for 30 years. She smiled, which was not something she did easily or carelessly, and he watched the smile in the way he watched everything about her, with the full attention of a man who has spent too long not paying attention and has decided he will not make that error again. What's since? Jess, she said. What, Edmund? Yes. He put his hand over hers on the fence post, and his hand was cold from the February air, and hers was likewise, and neither of them moved for a moment, standing in the frozen kitchen garden with the gray light of February above them, and the lane outside quiet. She did not think about Mrs. Tippet. She did not think about the 28 days or the 12 pounds or the way the village had decided what she was, and said so in rooms she was meant to be unable to hear. She thought about her father, who had taught her that a person's worth was most legible in what they chose to do when no one was watching. She thought about a man who had been watching. The following spring she found a new shoot growing from the base of the old beech tree, pushing through the crevice in the wall where the roots had won the last argument, small and green and entirely serious in its intention to remain. She showed it to Edmund that afternoon. He looked at it for a long time, crouching on the lane side of the wall with his hands on his knees and the spring light on his face. It will be the wall's problem in 20 years, he said. It will be our problem, she said. He stood. He looked at her in the way he had looked at her from the beginning, the way she had not understood until the 7th day at the inn, and had understood ever since. He took her hand. The beech wood was greening above them. The lane was warm with the first real warmth of the year. The valley had come back to itself, as valleys do, in its own time and without apology. And the life she had not known how to want was standing right beside her, solid and particular and entirely her own,